Blackwood was a quiet, picturesque little town, nestled in the mountains, far from the hustle and bustle of urban life. But there was one place in Blackwood that was known to cast a shadow over the town's peace, the Mansion of Shadows. There was something about that place that aroused the curiosity and fear of local residents. Emily, David, Sarah, and Michael were lifelong friends, known for their courage and thirst for adventure. The boredom of everyday life in Blackwood had awakened in them a desire for something more exciting. They heard about the horrifying stories about Shadow Manor and decided to investigate. It was the perfect opportunity for an adventure and, perhaps, debunk the scary myths that surrounded her. One autumn night, under the cover of stars, the group met in secret. They had backpacks loaded with flashlights, food, and courage. The cold, nocturnal atmosphere added a touch of mystery to the air as they approached the sinister mansion. The Mansion of Shadows, as it was called by local residents, stood majestically on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by a dense forest. It was an imposing structure, with Gothic architecture that seemed to merge with the darkness of the night. Broken windows and twisted vines added to its gloomy character. As they approached the mansion, the silence of the night was deafening, only occasionally interrupted by the howl of a distant owl. Emily was determined not to let fear rule them. She led the group through the mansion's main door, which creaked open like a ghostly sigh. The inside of the mansion was a frightening sight. Walls covered in faded wallpaper, antique furniture covered in dusty sheets, and torn curtains that swayed in the imaginary breeze gave the house an air of abandonment. The light from the lanterns cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an unsettling atmosphere. At first, the group scoffed at ghost stories and whispers that Shadow Manor was cursed. They joked as they explored the empty rooms and endless hallways. But as the night progressed, the atmosphere of the mansion began to affect them. David, normally the most skeptical of the group, began to feel uncomfortable. He swore he saw shadows moving in the corners of his eyes and heard soft footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. Trying to maintain his composure, he suggested they continue exploring. Sarah, who had always been the most sensitive of the group, was visibly upset. She claimed she felt an invisible presence around her, as if someone or something was constantly watching her. Michael, the bravest among them, noticed that his breathing was becoming heavier, as if the air was becoming denser. As the night progressed, the friends began to notice that something was not right in the Shadow Mansion. Strange sounds like distant laughter and unsettling whispers echoed through the hallways. Doors they swore they had left open were now inexplicably closed. What had started as an exciting adventure was quickly turning into a nightmare. The oppressive atmosphere of the mansion was sapping their courage, and fear began to creep into their hearts. Emily, however, was determined not to show weakness in front of her friends. She insisted they continue exploring, ignoring the growing sense of uneasiness that enveloped her. As the group delved deeper into Shadow Mansion, they had no idea that the true terror was just beginning. What awaited them in the depths of the mansion was far more terrifying than any of their expectations. As the night progressed in the Mansion of Shadows, the friends continued to explore the dark corridors and rooms. With each step, the feeling that they were not alone grew, and the strange sounds and unsettling shadows seemed to conspire to torment them. Sarah, who was already nervous from the beginning, started to get even more agitated. She claimed to have seen brief glimpses of shadowy figures moving in the shadows. Every time she passed a dusty mirror, the reflected image seemed distorted and disturbing, as if an invisible presence was behind her. David, the skeptic of the group, began to question her decision to explore the mansion. He noticed that the doors they had left open were now mysteriously closed, and the furniture covered in dusty sheets seemed to be moving around on its own. He tried to maintain his composure, but the feeling that something was wrong was tormenting him. Michael, normally fearless, felt as if the air around him was becoming heavier. He noticed that his breathing was becoming more labored, as if he was being suffocated by an invisible presence. Despite his courage, he began to feel a growing sense of restlessness. Emily, determined, not showing weakness in front of his friends, he insisted that they continue exploring the mansion. She believed the strange sounds and unsettling shadows were just tricks of the mind, but her own nervousness was beginning to undermine her confidence. As they explored a dark hallway, Sarah disappeared before their eyes. Friends of hers heard her screams echoing down the hallway, but when they reached where she was, they found only an empty hallway. Sarah had mysteriously disappeared, leaving only the echo of her screams as proof of her presence. Sarah's disappearance threw the group into panic. They split up to search for her, each of them braving the mansion's eerie halls on their own. The oppressive atmosphere of the mansion seemed to have trapped them in a maze of nightmares. As the night progressed, more inexplicable events occurred. David also disappeared, leaving Emily and Michael even more terrified. They felt increasingly vulnerable and powerless in the face of the dark events in the mansion. Emily and Michael gathered in the main hall, desperate to find their missing friends. The sound of shuffling footsteps and unintelligible whispers filled the air, creating a terrifying atmosphere. Fear was slowly eating away at his courage. Together, they decided to continue the search for their missing friends. No matter how much fear gripped them, they could not leave Sarah, David, and themselves at the mercy of the horrors of Shadow Manor. With their flashlights shaking in their shaking hands, they advanced through the shadowy mansion, determined to uncover the truth behind the disturbing disappearances. Emily and Michael continued to explore Shadow Manor, determined to find out what was happening to their missing friends, Sarah and David. With each step, the feeling that something sinister was hovering over them seemed to grow even more. As they advanced through the corridors, the darkness was suffocating, and the oppressive atmosphere of the mansion seemed to close in around them. They heard distant laughter and unsettling whispers, but they could not determine where they were coming from. Every door they opened revealed only empty, abandoned rooms, and time seemed to have lost all meaning. Hours passed, but the search for his friends yielded no results. Emily began to feel the invisible presence around her more intensely. She had the feeling that something was constantly watching her, as if invisible eyes were following her every movement. Michael, normally fearless, began to feel as if the air around him was becoming thicker. His breathing was becoming increasingly difficult, as if he was being suffocated by an invisible force. Despite her courage, the feeling of restlessness was beginning to undermine her resolve. While exploring the second-floor hallway, Emily and Michael heard a noise coming from one of the bedrooms. They approached cautiously and opened the door with shaking hands. What they found inside the room horrified them. In the center of the room, there was a table covered with a dark cloth, and on top of it was what appeared to be a collection of antique porcelain dolls. The dolls had empty eyes and sinister expressions, and each of them was dressed in an old-fashioned way. It seemed as if the dolls were arranged in some kind of macabre ritual. Emily and Michael exchanged worried looks. It seemed like the mansion was trying to communicate with them in a disturbing and dark way. As they watched the dolls, a whispering voice filled the room, echoing off the walls. "You shouldn't be here," the voice whispered, sending chills down Emily and Michael's spines. "This is our home now, and you are the intruders." The voice seemed to come from the dolls themselves, as if they were coming to life. Emily and Michael felt trapped, not knowing how to react to that terrifying situation. They could no longer deny that something supernatural was happening in Shadow Manor. Determined to find their friends and escape that haunted house, Emily and Michael retreated from the dolls' room. They continued to search the halls, hoping to find clues to Sarah and David's fate. As they advanced, the darkness around them seemed to come to life, the shadows writhing and dancing like living beings. The mansion began to shake slightly, as if responding to the presence of the intruders. As Emily and Michael faced the nightmare unfolding around them, they knew that Shadow Manor hid dark and terrible secrets that they had yet to uncover. Their hearts were filled with fear, but their determination to find their missing friends compelled them to continue, even though the price to be paid was unknown and terrifying. Emily and Michael continued to explore Shadow Mansion, determined to find their missing friends, Sarah and David, despite the horrors they encountered at every turn. The oppressive atmosphere of the mansion seemed to increase with each corridor they walked down, and the dark whispers seemed to intensify. As they searched the dark, abandoned rooms, Emily and Michael felt as if they were being watched by unseen eyes. The ominous presence that loomed over the mansion was beginning to weigh on them, but they knew they couldn't give up. Finally, they arrived at a solid wooden door that seemed to lead to a deeper part of the mansion. With hearts racing, they slowly opened it and entered a room that was plunged into almost solid darkness. Their flashlights illuminated what appeared to be an ancient ritual room. In the center of the room, a stone altar was adorned with black candles and strange inscriptions. Old paintings on the walls depicted hooded figures performing mysterious ceremonies. It was evident that the room had been used for occult practices. As Emily and Michael explored the room, the atmosphere grew heavier and the black candles on the altar began to light on their own, casting a dark light over the room. The sinister presence that watched them seemed to concentrate in the ritual room. It was then that a shadowy, hooded figure emerged from the shadows, materializing before them. It was a sinister entity with empty eyes and a supernatural presence. She spoke with a voice that seemed to echo from beyond the grave. "You shouldn't have come here," said the entity, its voice full of menace. "This mansion has been cursed for centuries, and you are now part of it." Emily and Michael, despite their fear, gathered the courage to ask about their missing friends. The sinister entity smiled, revealing teeth as sharp as knives. "Your friends are here," she said. "They have become part of the curse plaguing this mansion, a bid to ensure the curse continues." Emily and Michael were horrified by the revelation. They understood that the Mansion of Shadows had used Sarah, David, and themselves as offerings to keep their dark curse alive. Panic began to set in, but they knew they needed to find a way to face this entity and save their friends. The entity revealed that the only way to undo the curse was to face your worst fears and regrets. She would use these fears against them, testing their courage and determination. Emily and Michael realized they had no choice but to accept the challenge. The ritual room began to transform, the walls coming to life with terrifying images of Emily and Michael's deepest fears. They saw flashes of their pasts, moments of weakness and regret that tormented them. The sinister entity whispered dark words and encouraged friends to confront their fears. Emily found herself facing a moment of cowardice that had haunted her for years, while Michael relived a past mistake that had haunted him. They fought their own doubts and fears, determined to overcome them and save their friends. As they faced their worst nightmares, the ritual room shook, the black candles trembled, and the shadows writhed. Emily and Michael were determined not to be defeated by their own fears. Finally, with renewed courage, they looked into the sinister entity's empty eyes and challenged it. With a cry of determination, they recited exorcism words they had found in an ancient book in the ritual room. The mansion shook violently, and the shadows began to dissipate. The sinister entity released a terrified scream before disappearing into the depths of the mansion, and the ritual room turned into total darkness. Emily and Michael knew they had triumphed. The curse that imprisoned the Mansion of Shadows had been broken, and his missing friends were finally free. With hearts full of relief, they hurried to find Sarah and David, who were now unharmed. The terrifying experience left deep scars on Emily, Michael, and their friends, but they escaped the Shadow Mansion, which was now free of the curse that had haunted it for centuries. As they fled that dark place, they looked back, knowing that they would never return to that haunted mansion, which would now remain a grim reminder that evil can hide in the deepest shadows, and that not all horror stories are just legend.